Earth is home to many creatures. Some may even consider a few of them monsters. But what of those more elusive and hidden creatures? The ones we just can't seem to find. Welcome to Monday Morning Monsters. Cryptozoologist and paranormal researcher Barnaby Jones talks about the unknown, mythical, undiscovered, and unidentified creatures from around the world, and the people who have seen them, look for them, and research them. Hear from witnesses about their encounters, as well as renowned names in the field about their work and research. Barnaby is the founder and lead investigator for Cryptids, Anomalies, and the Paranormal Society, based in Wisconsin. CAPS travels across Wisconsin and beyond looking for connections between different phenomena and how they can all be connected. Now, your host of Monday Morning Monsters, Barnaby Jones.
Good morning, monsters. Today's episode is also going to be pre-recorded. Unfortunately, today we are not live, but that is because our guest on today's show is super important, and I wanted to make sure that we got a chance to talk to them. Like some of the other guests that have been pre-recorded. I mean, a lot of times people are busy and just can't get it in on their time. But this is really cool. I'm really looking forward to our interview today with our guest, Michael Freeman. And so today we are going to start out with our housekeeping as usual. So again, ladies and gentlemen, our show On the Trail of Undiscovered Beasts airs on Paraflix Paranormal Plus streaming service. It's just like Netflix, but it's the paranormal, or the paranormal of Netflix. So you get all your weird paranormal, cryptids, and other shows all on this platform. If you subscribe using the code CAPS10, you get 10% off your first 3 months. Also, guys, I want to remind everyone to go check out our online store. Show your support for Cryptids, Anomalies, the Paranormal Society, as well as Monday Morning Monsters, On the Trail of Undiscovered Beasts, and all of our other shows, podcasts, and programs. You can go to our website, wisconsincaps.com, and click on Shop Our Store, or go to tpublic/user/Wisconsin Caps. While you're online, make sure that you check out all of our social media. We can be found at Wisconsin Caps at Patreon, Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, YouTube, and WI Caps on Instagram. There you can find all the information on Whispers from the Dark podcast, Monday Morning Monsters, and all of our other shows. Coming up, we have the Frogman Festival in Mason, Ohio. That's going to be the first event that we're going to be at this year, and that'll be March 4th. So go ahead and go check that out. Then we go to South Carolina for the Haunting at Hagood Mill. And then the Salt Fork Bigfoot Convention in Salt Fork, Ohio. The Hodag Heritage Festival in Rhinelander, Wisconsin. Small Town Monsters Festival in June. And the Marinette Menominee Bigfoot and Paranormal Convention, June 9th and 10th in Marinette, Wisconsin. You can come out Friday, June 9th for a VIP dinner with all of our special guests, as well as stick around for Saturday, the 10th. We will have all of our speakers, presenters, and vendors. So come on out to June 9th and 10th. Get your tickets, wisconsincaps.com for that as well. MI Paracon, and then we're back down in South Carolina. And then the Great Lakes Paranormal Convention in Glen Beulah, Wisconsin. And that is in September. All right. With all that out of the way, I want to get to our guest today because it's going to be a great show. If you aren't familiar with any of his father's work, I highly recommend checking it out, and we're going to hear all about it today. So my guest on today's show is Michael Freeman. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on. It's great to be able to talk to you, and hopefully all the listeners will enjoy the show as well.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for making the time as well. Like I said, the show is pre-recorded. So with that in mind, right off the bat, for anybody that usually makes comments or questions throughout our live show, If they have questions or comments for you, how can they get a hold of you? What's your website or email or etc.?
Three ways, basically, people can get a hold of me. Facebook is really easy. Michael Freeman. You can look me up on there. Also Instagram, mfreeman77 is my name on there. And I also have an email just for Bigfoot and Bigfoot questions, specifically anything pertaining to the book. And that is freemanbigfootfiles@gmail.com.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So with that out of the way, if anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out because, as I said, today is not live. So you can feel free to leave comments. And I'm sure if, you get a chance, come check the comments out and maybe respond to any of them as we go if people have them. But other than that, can you tell us, before we get into the book, because I really want to delve into that, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Well, I live in Spokane, Washington, so not far from where I grew up in Walla Walla, and all this Bigfoot research was, going on at that time. I'm a couple hours north now. I've been a gymnastics coach for 22 years, and so that's pretty much, what I do for work. At least I've got 3 boys of my own. An 11-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 1-year-old. So that keeps me busy, for, the rest of the time when I'm not working. And then, I dabble in this thing called Bigfoot from time to time. So
you dabble in it, huh? So obviously, like I said, we're gonna. We'll get to the book and all that history, but do you yourself, you go out and do research as well, correct?
Not really, not that much. I'm not what you would call like a really committed boots on the ground researcher that goes out all the time and looks for evidence. I just don't have time, and I don't have the resources to do it at this point. If something does happen, or if somebody sees something or finds evidence, tracks or something like that in my neck of the woods and I hear about it, I'll go check it out. But I'm not out there, all the time actively, searching anything like that. I would consider myself, honestly, more of a historical researcher. And I spend a lot of my time when it comes to Bigfoot just dealing with evidence from the past, especially from the Blue Mountain area, and just trying to compare and contrast that, and not just my father's evidence, but evidence from all people, from that area throughout time, to just look for similarities and differences and try to draw some better conclusions from that evidence.
Very cool. Very cool. And as far as historical research and stuff goes, I think you've done a very, very good job, especially with your father's work. Thank you. All right, well, let's get into the book, because that's what we're here for, man. So we have your brand new book here, put out by Doug Hychek's publishing company, correct?
That is correct. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So this book is basically a really cool chronicle of all of the evidence and research and stuff that your father has done, and it's a really interesting format. Why don't you tell us a little bit about it? Well, tell us about your father to start with.
Yeah, well, my dad was Paul Freeman. He passed away in 2003, so he's no longer with us, and he spent 15 years of his life obsessed with trying to prove to the world that he wasn't crazy, and that what he had encountered in 1982 was real. And he, depending on, I guess, how you look at it, because he's kind of a controversial figure. I won't shy away from that, and I do talk about that a lot. But he's certainly, one of the most compelling names in the history of Bigfoot research. And is considered a legend by a lot of people, and is considered not, by some people as well. And, that's okay. But what I wanted to do, with this book, and you hit it right on the head, is I wanted it to be an evidence catalog. And I wanted to take all of his evidence and present it to people so they could see it all in one place, all together at once. and the trackways and the casts and some of the hair samples and the pictures and the video footage, as well as my dad's personal audio recordings that he did in private, and he did those with the intention of writing his own book at some point. And unfortunately, he passed away before, that ever became a reality. And he was kind of out of Bigfoot at that time anyway. So I'm not sure if that's something that ever happened.
You had touched on the fact that your dad had audio files and interviews as well, and that they were included in the book. And, myself sitting here is going, well, how do you have audio files in a book? But you actually do have audio files in the book. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I do. And actually, that was Doug Hychek's idea. I was not intending to do that. I didn't even know that really was a thing. I'd seen QR codes before, but it was for scanning for coupons or, advertisements and things like that. And what I was actually going to do is I was going to transcribe these audio recordings, and they were just going to be written chapters in the book, what I was saying. And I've got about, there's close to 8 hours of those audio tapes that I had to weed through to get, I think it's an hour and 45 minutes, close to 2 hours, something like that, of just total audio out of those 8 hours. But Doug Hychek said, no, I have this technology. This is what we're going to do. Let's let people hear his own voice. And it's going to be so cool. Trust me, Michael. And just immediately, as soon as he said that, I was like, yeah, we're going to do that. That's exactly what I want to do. I want people to listen to him, talk and tell his own story, because first of all, it's just cool. And secondly, my dad is an engaging person, and he has this, kind of slow delivery, but it's to the point, and he's kind of funny, and he's a good storyteller. And it just seemed perfect where he's not with us anymore and he's not alive, to just really put him in the book and say, yeah, this is, my dad's in this book. Here's his voice. He's actually a part of it.
That's really cool that you were able to do that. I mean, I want to show so I have a copy of the book, as I said, and you can see, I mean, this is a nice book for one. I mean, it is hardcover. It is all color. Well, not all color, because some of the pictures obviously are in black and white.
Some of them were photographed in black and white. Correct. Yep.
But I want to show one of the, like here, you can see in these pages here, you actually have the QR codes and stuff. So you can scan that, for the people listening in that, so as you're reading along in the book, you can scan and scan the codes and hear the audio clips that go along with each section of the book. And that's, I mean, I don't know of any other book that's done that so far, at least as far as Bigfoot wise.
Well, not to the extent that we did in this book. I know Tim Curran did it in the Bigfoot. Just shortly before we were both writing them at the same time with Doug Hychek, and he beat me to it as far as the release goes a little bit. And he has some QR codes there that have some material, but it's not as like a central part of the story like it is with my book. If we didn't have the QR codes in the book I wrote, it wouldn't be a book, honestly, because to me, it's the most important thing that's in there. And it's my favorite part of the book. And we have, video files as well, not just audio, but there's 2 hours of video footage that's included in there, and maybe more than 2 hours. I'm not sure if I have it was right around 2 hours. And then we added a bonus content feature like a week before it got released, like right at the last second. And so, that's a half hour. So it's probably just a little over 2 hours of video, but it's so cool, and I really think, one of the best compliments I've received is I was doing a podcast, and someone made a comment on there that they think that the way my book has been structured and done is going to be the future style of books in this cryptid field. And if so, then fantastic that I got to be a part of that. I think that's awesome.
That's definitely a very pioneer work. I like the format of it.
Yeah, I appreciate the compliment, and it kind of took forever. It took a long time. And I did basically the layout of the book. I mean, I wrote the chapters that I wrote that are in there, and I wrote 4 chapters, and I had great contributors, write as well. But the actual, written text is not that much. You can read it in a couple hours. It's nothing that's going to blow you away. But it is nice big print. It's easy to read. And there's nothing too scientific, except maybe, Jeff Meldrum has, some big words and scientific stuff. It's easy to follow, But I did the layout. I picked all the pictures for the book, and there's 180, color pictures in there, and a lot of those are full page pictures. And I had about, close to 600 pictures on a big table at one point in time, like literally, like laid out in front of me. And I'm sitting here going, okay, what are we going to pull and what are we going to use? Because I had a limit. I can't just throw 600 full color pictures like in a book. I guess I could have, but then it would have been over $100, and we're going to be way out of the goal we're getting at there. And I did all that, and I picked what video footage we wanted to use and where I wanted to place it. And I also decided where I wanted to place every picture. And because the audio tapes are old cassette tapes and they're so dear to me and they're so important, I wouldn't mail them to Doug Highcheck and the team. And so I did all the editing for the audio myself, like from home as well. And so just hours and hours and hours of work on this thing over the course of about 9 months, is really all that it took, which it seemed like a really long time. But I've been told for what it is, it went pretty quick.
Mm-hmm. It's a really, really nice tribute too, as well, for all of your father's work and that. So it's really cool. But there's all kinds of, the newspaper articles, so it's not just, the story and the evidence, but it's the chronicling of everything that happened and all the publicity and different venues and stuff that this was in. Alongside, you have all of the evidence, just tons of footprint casts and in-ground photos and all this evidence. It's, for somebody that's interested in researching in that, it's a really good book as well.
Yeah, thank you. And I always forget when I mention everything. I talk about the audio and the video and all this stuff and the pictures, and I forget about the newspaper articles. And actually, to be honest with you, that's one of my favorite things about the book as well. And there was a little battle that took place over whether we were going to just include the text or we were going to include the photos of the clippings. And I wanted to include the photos of the clippings directly from my dad's photo albums because I thought it was more personal, and I wanted the book to kind of look like our family photo album when you flip through it. And so I decided to just go with the clippings that way, the way that they were. But those are fantastic, as well. And I would urge anyone who has the book, when you start reading the book, to do it in order. Number one, don't cherry pick and skip around. And number two, to listen or watch the QR codes as they come up. Like, don't read everything first and then go back and do the QR codes. Do them as they come, as they appear because they're part of the story, the way it was intended, and to read the paper articles as they come up because that's the way they were placed and it was intended, and everything is, been put in a specific order for a reason, because it all goes together, and makes sense. But getting back to, what you're saying about the pictures and the in-ground tracks and all that. Yeah. I mean, there's a ton of pictures of casts and tracks. And I left some of them, even though there's captions and they're labeled. Like I left some of them and I didn't specifically say like, this is what individual animal this is. On a few of those, because there is a section of the book where I kind of challenge the reader to look at all of it and draw your own conclusions, because we have a lot of footprints in there that are from reoccurring individuals that belong to the same individual, that have been identified and even have names, that we've given them at this point. And on some of them, I tell you them, I don't. The family observations thing, where I challenge the reader to take what they think personally. That's kind of one of your challenges is, can you identify these animals and can you match this? And what do you think about it? So I wanted to involve the reader a little bit as well and kind of make them feel important and give them something to do.
Absolutely. I know one of your chapter authors in there, Cliff Barrickman, has a lot of work with the identifying different individuals based on trackways, and he's done a fabulous presentation I've seen at some events where he goes through his whole collection and talks about them specifically and that. So Cliff has written a chapter in your book. Who else do you have in there as far as like other authors and renowned names in the field?
Well, yeah, Cliff Barrickman, of course. And I mean, to be honest with you, I probably wouldn't have done this book without Cliff. I mean, he kind of, he gave me, motivation and some confidence to let me know. And then as we were going through pictures and we were identifying individuals and stuff, I spent hours with Cliff, honestly. And we sent emails back and forth, talking about tracks and casts, to make sure that I was correct, because I didn't want incorrect information. The other person that was involved in that conversation was Dr. Jeff Meldrum. And, he also wrote one of the chapters in there. And we also, had some conversation about the same thing and shared pictures of casts and tracks and things like that. And just to make sure that we were all in agreement on everything. Aside from those two, Doug Hychek, who published the book and, is responsible for really, bringing it to life, wrote a fantastic chapter in there about my father's footage. Tom Powell, who was a school teacher from Portland, Oregon, and an author himself, and just a great guy, wrote a chapter in there. And the piece that Tom wrote is actually, to be honest with you, a favorite of mine. It's my favorite piece of journalism that's ever been written about. I have a lot. It's very dear to me. It's on new. That piece was written about 2010, and I specifically asked Tom Powell if I could use that piece in the book. And so we updated the piece a little bit. So instead of saying 10 years ago, now it says 20 years ago. So stuff like that to make it current and relevant. But it's something that I knew I wanted to use because I had always liked and respected that piece so much that he wrote. Jonathan Summerlin also wrote a chapter, and he is the grandson of the late, great Wes Summerlin, who is, as far as the Blue Mountains goes, one of the Bigfoot legends out there. And then Dar Addington wrote a chapter for the book, and she's someone that a lot of people are not familiar with, and they should be, honestly. And this is the first thing she's ever done publicly for Bigfoot. With the exception of a cartoon that she drew for Vance Orchard for Bigfoot of the Blues when he did that book. But she was part of my dad's and researcher, and she's a pioneer for researchers, actually. But and she's also the last surviving member of any of those people that my dad did research with. So she still has, the stories and all that stuff. And she took detailed field notes of everything, which is what she provided for the book. It is one of those, and they're fantastic.
Absolutely. Yeah, I know your father and yourself get brought up a lot. I listen to Bigfoot and Beyond with Cliff and Bobo, and they're big fans of your work and stuff. And I've heard a lot about your book coming out, and then your interview when you were on there as well. And it was right then that I ordered it. I pre-ordered the book, so.
Oh, awesome! Good, you got the break.
Cool. So, tell us a little bit more about what did your father do? So obviously he was a Bigfoot researcher. Where did he research? What are some of the things that he came up with? I know we have the footage. We'll get to that a little bit after the break here, but just kind of what was the area that he worked and some stuff.
Well, the area he worked is the Blue Mountains, and that is southeastern Washington State and northeastern Oregon. And they kind of drift into western Idaho a little bit, over towards Hell's Canyon and the Nez Perce Reservation. And that is the area that he was familiar with. That's where he worked. And he started out with his first encounter, which was on June 10th, 1982. He was working for the Forest Service in the Mill Creek watershed of the Umatilla National Forest, which is the Blue Mountains right there. And he's what you would call a boundary patrolman or an outrider. Sometimes you hear that term as well. And he would either be on horseback or in a service vehicle. And he was responsible for 25 miles of the watershed just to make sure that, nobody was trespassing or poaching or anything like that, keeping an eye on it. I've recently learned, and I didn't know this because I grew up around them, that not every state has municipal watersheds. So for the people that don't know what that is, I guess it's an area that's protected that supplies drinking water to the nearby cities. And it's government-owned forestry land that the river runs through, and it is, off limits to civilians. So you cannot go in there unless you are a government employee. And this particular section of the Blue Mountains is connected to what they call the Winnehaw Toucan Wilderness, which is 180,000 square acres without any roads or access to it. And it's considered a, kind of a haven or a hotbed for Sasquatch activity. But that's where, he got started, and that's where he did his research. And he was not a believer before, he was working for the Forest Service and had his first encounter, where he walked up on one and saw one. And, it really set off, and, I like to use the term obsession for the next 15 years, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I've heard a lot about Paul before, having heard about the book and stuff, from other presentations and research and that I've done. But that's really cool. We're gonna get to also this later, but I have a cast that I was not aware of that your father actually had originally cast the original of. So that's really cool. So we will get to that and some more about the footage that he shot, and right after this message, and we'll be right back.
If you're a fan of the paranormal world, then you'll love WLTK-DB Talk Radio. Talk shows bringing you the latest on everything paranormal, cryptozoological, metaphysical, true crime, psychic readings, and more. The truth is here and now on WLTK-DB Talk Radio at WLTK-DB.com.
All right, we are back with Michael Freeman, author of the book Freeman Bigfoot Files, on your father's work, Paul Freeman, and all of his research and evidence and stuff. Can you tell us, where can we get a copy of this book?
Well, there's a few places you could get a copy. Hangar1publishing.com if you want to go directly through the publisher. You can order through them. You can also just hop on Amazon, and order one. They're one of the big distributors right now. Barnes & Noble online as well. And, Cliff Barrickman has them at the North American Bigfoot Center, and you can get them through their website. When they're in stock, from time to time, he has them. But if you're, wanting one right away and you want to make sure they're in stock, Amazon's probably the best way to go. And you can also get the ebook format, as well. It's quite a bit cheaper, although I would say it's really not as cool. And this book is something that you should have in hardback. I mean, that's the way it was intended to be. But, anyone that picks it up, I appreciate it no matter what format it's on. So,
absolutely. Very cool. Yeah. As I was saying, I want to show us again. This is the actual book right here. It is hardcover, and it is full color inside. Well, that's a bad example. Let's see.
Yeah, let's find a picture at least.
Yeah. There we go. You can see some full color here. A lot of pictures of casts, and I think like a lot of stuff of like you growing up with your dad as well is in here. So like,
that is correct.
Like you said, it's like a family album, with, all of your history and stuff. And we were talking about like newspaper articles. Here's one. So you can see a lot of the evidence as well as the full page of the newspaper clippings and stuff. And like you said, I have to agree with you. I really like the fact that it's the actual newspaper clipping and not just the article that was written, because you can see the date it was published and everything about it, and that's really cool. So your dad is also famous or infamous for a video footage that he shot.
That is correct.
Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Do you want to show the clip first, or how would you like to do it?
Yeah, I can talk about it a little bit, then we can show the clip. That's fine.
Sure.
So it's what's called the Freeman footage, and it was shot on August 20th, 1992 at a place that we call Deduck Spring, and that is in northeastern Oregon. It is not inside the watershed, so it is public land where that was shot. The technical name, I guess, is Walden Pond at the Deduck Trailhead, but everyone just kind of calls it Deduck Spring, But yeah, it's interesting footage for a couple of reasons. It's become more interesting as of late for something that has been enhanced and is a little more provable now than it was before. But a lot of people consider it to be the second best piece of visual evidence next to the Patterson-Gimlin film, of course, that anyone's ever got.
I would have to agree. Like looking at the footage, I mean, it's definitely up there with the Patterson-Gimlin. I mean, obviously the subject matter is a little farther away, goes through some bushes and stuff, and we'll see in a second. But like it definitely is pretty compelling footage in that. And I know, like we had talked about, Doug Hychek has an entire chapter in the book going over analyzing it and the video analyzation and stuff of this clip. So very cool. So I do also want to apologize to you. This is kind of a crappy copy of this, but this is the only one that I could find.
Yes, it is. But there is a much, much better version inside the book.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right. So this is going to be, I think we start out, you said walking down the road.
I believe you're going to start where he's examining tracks that he has found on the trail. Yes.
Correct. Yep. All right. So here we go.
Look at that. Can't see much up through here. I hear the brush popping and stuff. Oh, there he goes. Jesus. Get up here where I can see him real quick. Get up here. Get a better picture. Where the doggone thing went, it crossed at us there.
So what we're looking at there is obviously, I can't talk. If we want to look at that again real quick, you can see, if anybody missed it, like there's a creature kind of about the middle of the screen, right? And it moves off to your left. Would you agree?
Yeah, it comes from right to left. There's basically like three sections, to the footage here. We have the first section, which we refer to as the head snap, where it walks in front of the Douglas fir tree and turns its head to look at my dad, at which point it goes behind another tree and some deadfall and hides, and pretty much completely camouflages itself and goes out of sight before it gets up again and walks off to the left, at which point my dad loses it and can't find it. and is trying to track it. Now, what's interesting about this is he thinks, or thought, I should say, he's not with us anymore. He thought that it went a different direction than it actually did. And so it surprised him a little bit because it does come back up in the video. If you play past this point, and you can hear him say, well, there's two of them, I guess, which has become really interesting, as of late with the more enhancements we do on there. But yeah, a lot of people don't realize when it walks off to the left and it disappears, and unless you've been right there to the film site, about 15 yards past where it goes off camera, there is about a 12 or 15 foot ravine that drops off, and you just disappear in that. And then on the other side of that, it's kind of a hill, and then you go into the watershed, which is, off limits. So.
All right. Well, with that, let's take another look right at that where it's walking by there. Hopefully here. Oh, hang on.
Oh, there he goes. Jesus. Get up here where I can see him real quick.
Yeah, you can actually, where it shows that you see it move across, and then it almost completely disappears there, like you said, behind that bush, and you're watching and there's nothing there, and then it kind of pops back out.
It does completely disappear. And what's really awesome is the new enhanced footage that we have that Doug Hychek and his team, had been working on. And I'm assuming, since you've read the book, that you've watched the enhanced footage in there. It kind of loops it, the tree hide, but you can see now that there's a big branch that curves and is rounded. And when the subject there, the Bigfoot, hides behind that tree, it kind of curves its back in perfect line with this tree branch. But what you can also see now that you couldn't see before in the version you're showing there is that when it does that, it turns its head and it looks at my dad again before it stands up and walks off. And so we can see a lot of things now that we weren't able to see before. And of course, as I've been told lately, what we just watched there might not even be the most important part of this video anymore. And that the most important part of this video might be what we call the baby lift, which comes later, where the individual comes back up, and my dad says, well, I think there's two of them. And you can clearly see that she picks something up off the ground, and it has legs and feet that articulate on its own, and certainly does look like a baby. And the enhancements of that, with the new enhancements, and you can see that in the book, are fantastic, and it's still not super, super clear, because it is, 8, millimeter digital magnetic tape, which was not great. But and it's like 400 pixels, and you zoom in on it, and it just gets blurry. So it was terrible technology for recording anything, but it was convenient for the time. But the enhancements we have now, I think it's pretty undeniable that has to be a baby. And if it's not a baby, I would like someone to tell me exactly what it is. And no one has been able to do that yet. I mean, the best somebody came up with is they said it was like a marionette puppet or, something like that, that's being, articulated, and for the people that think like, well, that's a man in a suit or whatever. Well, then there's a baby in a suit that's sitting out there in the woods as well, then, if that's the case, because, that's a baby. And unfortunately, in the version you have there, even if we stopped it at the exact moment that happens, you wouldn't be able to see it, because it's just not good, and you can't see it. But you can certainly see it in the new enhanced footage. And you can see it in the new enhanced footage without even zooming in on it or slowing it down. You can see it at full speed, at regular, distance, because it's been enhanced so well.
Very cool. Very cool. A lot of those older films, like you talked about the Patterson Gimlin and stuff, the older films actually had really good clarity. Yeah. It's just that you're looking at so much degradation over copies of copies of copies of copies. And obviously this one, is not the original,
Right.
And, It
Well,
just
and
aggregates it.
the Patterson film as well, that was film, at least. Okay, and so we can do a little bit more film. What my dad was working with was that digital tape, and so it's not even real film. And plus, the original master copy, which I have, it's in my possession. I keep it locked up, but that one actually looks pretty good. I think it looks a lot better than what most people think it probably does, because people are used to seeing what you kind of showed there. But what happened is, they took that and then it was put on VHS tape. And when it was put on VHS tape, it was interlaced. And then it was taken from the VHS, interlaced, and it was put on DVD. And then it was moved from DVD to YouTube. And by the time you get around to seeing what we just showed, it looks terrible. And people complain that it's blurry and you can't see anything. But it's not the truth. If you see the original, or if you see like the new enhanced versions of it, it looks so much better. And so there's a lot of detail there that, maybe people don't see before. One of the things, that we're interested in and we're kind of studying being that we think that this individual might be pregnant again, or she may be very recently postpartum, because her abdomen and her midsection appear to be extremely large, and something we haven't really seen in a Bigfoot subject, before. So she certainly does look like she's pregnant. And if the small one that she has that you can see in the enhanced footage with her, if it's even a year old, there's a good chance, that she's pregnant again. Something else I'd like to point out, since I've been talking about this baby, and if you read the book, you've already read this, but this is something my dad never even knew existed. And he didn't know that there was a possibility that there might be a baby in the footage until Doug Hychek covered it in 2001 in his home, like watching the film in slow motion, frame by frame, and then brought it to my dad almost 10 years after the footage was shot. And my dad had no clue that was even in there. And what he refers to in the footage as the second one that he sees, or he thinks he sees, is actually the one that walked in front of the tree. It just went a different route than he thought, and it pops back up someplace else. And he thinks it's a second one, and he thinks he's kind of being surrounded a little bit, and he starts to get a little bit nervous. But we now know that he's probably incorrect. There's only one set of footprints there, and that he saw the same one twice, but that he was also correct, and there was a second one. It's just a lot smaller, and that he never actually saw it. But I'm glad that it was brought to him before he died, because he died in 2003, so he only died about a year and a half, after he even found out the possibility of this. And at that point in time, it wasn't enhanced well enough that you still couldn't even really see it that much. But thankfully, Doug Hychek has enhanced it enough by now that even though it's still not good enough, it's a lot better than it used to be.
Absolutely.
Sorry, I ramble on a little bit. So you just got to tell me to stop.
You're absolutely fine. You're fine. No, and again, I apologize for the copy of that, but that was I wasn't going to show it, and I thought, you know what, this is important. I want to put up the footage, and I just went on YouTube and grabbed the first copy that I found that had the whole video of it. So, but definitely, like you said, I mean, people, you had talked about your father being more, like a controversial.
Yeah, and I mean, on asking, there we go. Unless you're asking me for a better version of it, you're not going to get a better version of it, unfortunately. Yeah. And the better versions that we do have not been publicly released. The version that you can see in the book is housed at a secure private YouTube channel that you can only access through the QR code if you have the book. And you can't search YouTube or anything and pull that up. It has copyright on it and all that stuff that we've done, to try to protect it, because I, don't want it floating out all over the internet. Even though it's only a matter of time, and it will be, and that's fine. It's whatever. But at least for the moment, we don't want it. But there's a few other versions out there that you can see. MK Davis did one some years ago that's like stabilized, and it's supposed to be in 4K or whatever, and it looks a little better, but it's nothing fancy. But as of right now, if you want to see a really good version, you can buy the book. There's my marketing, and scan it and watch that. Or I mean, if you were so inclined and you've never been there, you could go to Boring, Oregon, and you could go to the North American Bigfoot Center and see Cliff Barrickman, and he does show the footage in the museum. I gave him permission to do that. And he has a very nice copy that is enhanced that I allow him to use there for the, you know, the Patreons of the museum and the clientele. So.
We were talking earlier about, you know, your father being this controversial figure and stuff. And, you know, I think it's important to point out that, you know, like we said, when you're looking at this footage and you say, oh, it's a man in a costume or something walking through, you're seeing a really bad copy of this footage, you know, and a lot of the times that's the way it is with these, the pictures that are out there or the video that are out there of these creatures is, you know, maybe you're seeing a first generation copy of something, but chances are it's been shared and copied and put into somebody else's video talking about it and so on and so on. So do you want to talk a little bit about that? Why are people so up in arms that this is not a legitimate video?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think, to be honest with you, any Bigfoot footage, even the Patterson film, looks like a man in a suit until you actually see a man in a suit. and then you realize the difference. Okay. Right. But you know, it's a cryptid that is not supposed to exist. And so for most people, when you see pictures or you see footage like that, the first thing they think is, oh, that can't be real. And so therefore they just go to, it's gotta be, you know, a man in a suit or CGI now, I guess CGI is the thing. But, you know, like I said, yeah, it looks like a man in a suit until you actually see a man in a suit walk the same path and you video it. And then, you know, it's a man in a suit because it's completely different, you know. But, you know, I just think, you know, there's a couple of reasons. And one of the things I have been talking about a little bit lately, you know, is that the Patterson film is so fantastic. And it's obviously, as far as visual evidence goes, it is better than my father's, you know, visually. The one thing my dad's footage has is the audio. That is nice, you know, and now we have this baby in the footage, which is a game changer as well, which brings a whole new level. But just looking at it, the Patterson film is the number one thing, and it always has been, and maybe it always will be. But if there is a negative to the Patterson film, it's that it has caused a lot of its followers and its believers to have the mindset that every Sasquatch should look, act, and walk just like Patty does. And if they don't, then it's not real. It has to be fake. And I think that's a terrible mindset to have, because just like people or chimpanzees or anything else, we can have a lot of different, you know, body types and facial features and behaviors and personalities in the way we walk. And if you're a male or you're a female, or, you know, possibly you're pregnant, and there's just so many, you know, different possibilities that go into this, and that you can't say this is real or this is fake, you know, right off the bat, you know, unless it literally is just a man in a suit, you know. And I think that there's a lot more photos or even videos than people think that might actually be legitimate, that just kind of get tossed aside because they don't look, act, and move exactly like Patty does, you know. And I think that's kind of a crime. So I always say, like, I think that's the one negative thing about the Patterson Gimlin film, you know, is that it is so respected that it's kind of caused that attitude a little bit. Also, you know, you just have, you know, there's different people that have different beliefs. And one of the things that kind of centers around my dad are some rumors or some hearsay from like 35, 40 years ago from a few people that he didn't necessarily get along with, or they didn't like him. And they have kind of carried some weight over some years. One of them being Renee DeHenden. You know, I'll just be vocal. Everybody knows that. Him and Renee DeHenden. Well, I shouldn't say they didn't like each other. My dad never had a negative thing to say about that man in his entire life, but Renee DeHenden did not like my dad or his evidence, and was very vocal about that, for that may be. And he's someone that's looked up to in the community and has a lot of followers and a lot of people that kind of idolize him. And so right off the bat, from the get-go, they just kind of say, well, he didn't like Paul Freeman. I don't like Paul Freeman. Mm-hmm. And it's unfortunate, because I don't think that's the way it should be looked at. And so I always challenge people, you know, that in Bigfoot in general, you know, this is a business. It really is. And it's a business of evidence. And if you're not bringing evidence to the table, you're not bringing anything. And rumors and hearsay and stories don't cut it. And so if you're not taking a look at the full body of evidence from a scientific standpoint, you're really doing yourself a disservice. You know, whether you're an expert or you consider yourself a researcher, an expert, or you're just a novice. Like, I don't care. Not even just about my dad, but anybody, any cryptid, paranormal, aliens, ghosts, whatever, look at the evidence for yourself. Look at it from a scientific standpoint and try not to listen to what other people think about it, and then draw your own conclusions, because, you know, there are people that, you know, devoted their entire lives to anatomy and have PhDs in the subject that are 100% behind my dad and his evidence, and were their entire lives until they died, like Dr. Grover Krantz. And now we have Dr. Jeff Meldrum, who's, you know, most likely the world's foremost expert on Bigfoot anatomy, will tell you that it is absolutely legit and it is important evidence and some of the best evidence that's ever been found. You know, so, you know, whichever way you want to look at it is fine. But like I said, you know, we have the scientific backing on our side. Maybe not the rumor mill, but we have the scientific data. So
absolutely. Very cool. So you touched on something there I want to get back to here. You know, when you're talking about, you know, Patty, you know, the Patterson-Gimlin film, you know, you're talking about how everyone thinks that this is how this creature should move and act and stuff like that. And a lot of people don't realize that these things also can move on all fours, you know, and have been seen moving on all fours. So when people are looking for tracks and evidence and stuff, you only look for these footprints. And that brings us on to the other thing that I wanted to talk about, because see, I'm good at this.
There you go. There you go. I know what we're talking about.
Yep. And so, like I said, you know, everyone's looking for the same kind of prints in that. But your dad actually got one of probably, you know, in my opinion, one of the most famous casts. And I have a copy in my collection. And I was telling you before we went on air here today that I was not aware that your dad actually cast this. So what I got here is I think anybody that's seen like a lot of Bigfoot stuff at conventions and stuff has seen this cast. And I would love for you to kind of give a little description, talk about it, and where it came from and that.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a very famous cast. A lot of people, it's their favorite cast. Actually, I've heard that. And I know it's Cliff Berkman's. It's one of his favorites and one of the first casts he ever got when he got into Bigfoot. But that is the Paul Freeman Knuckles cast. That was found on June 16th, 1982 at a place called Elk Wallow at the bottom of Lowell Canyon, and that was in the watershed. My father was on patrol with another Forest Service ranger by the name of Bill Epic. They were actually on lunch that day, and they stumbled across about 40 footprints from two different individual Sasquatch. And this was actually 6 days after my dad had his eyewitness encounter and saw one. So very, very recent. The first individual tracks they found, Grover Krantz determined that they belonged to the same animal that my dad had seen on June 10th and that they had made casts of. And the second animal, which was unseen, is where we get this knuckle print from. And we also get some casts from that are known as the Paul Freeman dermals, and are very famous. The originals of the left and right foot are actually in the Smithsonian Institution. They've been there since 1982 and they're still there today. And they are fantastic examples of dermatoglyphics on the foot. And something that Krantz kind of went crazy about and wrote about in his book, Big Footprints. And then I believe it was retitled Bigfoot Sasquatch Evidence in its second edition or whatever later in life. But yeah, that's where this knuckle comes from. Interesting with the knuckle, it has a few anatomical features that are interesting. It has a over-exaggerated thickness of the pad of the thumb. It also shows an outward rotated thumb, which is very interesting. And an outward rotated thumb, our thumb rotates inward, so it closes into the hand. An outward rotated thumb would close the same way the rest of our fingers do. Ugh, I can't even make my thumb do that. But it would look like the rest of your fingers, which is great physically for strength if you're holding on to something or, say, trying to break something. Not so great if you're trying to build fires or use small tools, something like that. But it would be a non-opposable thumb. It would be what we call outward rotated. It's also something that you do hear from eyewitnesses in accounts where they've seen Sasquatch holding onto tree branches or sticks, things like that. You will see that described. The other cool thing about this cast is it does have the presence of what appears to be a thumbnail. And so there's some very cool anatomical features there. I will say that my dad has a couple of other handprints that are relatively well known, one from 1986 and one from 1994 at Biscuit Ridge. Both of those prints as well have outward rotated thumbs, which is also something that is consistent with the Fort Bragg handprints, and something that's also consistent with the handprints that Mr. Tom Shea found in Kentucky as well. So we're getting anatomical similarities through, you know, different decades and through different regions of the United States. So, you know, very, very interesting.
Absolutely. Like I think I told you, I don't know if I said it on air or not, but, you know, like we were talking about being able to establish different individuals based on looking at the footprints and stuff. And that's something, you know, like if these things were all hoaxed, if somebody's out there making stompers or whatever, and you're finding the same similarities all over the United States, all over the world, you know, with these different, you know, the Yetis, the Yaren, and etc., the different varieties or whatever, why would you have those similarities, that same kind of style of a footprint, or, you know, who's really going around the entire world doing these, if not an entire species? You know? Right.
Yeah. I mean, you know, and I brought up, you know, Tom Shea in Kentucky, and I have in my collection, I have a handprint of his, I believe from 2016. And it looks almost, I mean, man, it's eerie, almost identical to my dad's 1994 handprint from Biscuit Ridge. And the measurements between like the index finger and the thumb, the pinky and the thumb, the width across the palm are almost identical, to the point where when you first see it, you know, my first impression was, well, somebody took my dad's cast and, you know, just put it in the ground, but it's the other hand. So that is not what somebody did, because my dad's is a right hand and this is a left hand. But I mean, just, you know, like any other animal or people, you know, or anything like that, you would have to think, you know, if they're relatively the same size or the same age, they're going to have relatively, you know, matching dimensions, you know, and some people have bigger hands and smaller hands and whatnot, you know, but there's got to be some consistency there, you know, and some congruent information. But that is one of the things that really interests me. And actually, Cliff Berrickman is the first one that showed me Tom Shea's handprint. And when I first saw it, I went, oh, wow. Like, yeah, that looks almost exactly like my dad's. And I started doing measurements and whatnot. And I got a copy of it. And I went, wow, this is crazy. I mean, you would think those two individual Sasquatch would have to be almost the same size. You would think the same sex, at least, you know. But yeah, I mean, there are a lot of similarities, a lot of anatomical features, you know, that you see, you know, across this. And, you know, I want to point out as well that, you know, like the mid-tarsal break, things like that Jeff Meldrum kind of brought to us in like 1999, 2000 is when, you know, he started publishing on that. We have examples of that in casts my dad got in 1982, you know, and there's examples of that in casts that were taken by other people before that. And so if you think my dad or these other people are out there and they're hoaxing this evidence, you know, yeah, apparently my dad was predicting the future. and he knew what they were going to find and what should be in the anatomy of this creature, and that he was some kind of you know primatologist or anatomical genius, along with these other guys before him that were faking tracks, and they were all predicting the future, and they were going to show mid-tarsal break, and they were going to show, you know, dorsiflexion of the toes, and they were going to show toe splay, and, you know, they were going to put dermatoglyphics in there, talk about dramatic. I don't even know how you hoax dermatoglyphics in a track. I mean, seriously, right? Or how you would even carve them or get them into a stomper. I mean, it's just one of the things, you know, especially where you look at some of those, you know, the derms that are on, you know, some of my dad's tracks at least, and it's because they're not the same size as human dermatoglyphics. They're larger, right? But they're all perfectly spaced out. between each other with, this spacing and all this stuff. And I believe the 82 derms that were found with the knuckle there at Elk Wallow, there were 40 like FBI forensic experts that looked at those tracks that Grover Krantz, took the tracks to, including, the FBI headquarters in like Douglas, Wyoming, right there. One of the guys looked at those. And I know one of the agents who I don't believe he gave his name. He wouldn't officially go on record or whatnot, but basically said that, these are unfakeable and that the, repercussions of what this means is not even something that he's comfortable speaking on. And so, there you go. Like I said, take a look at the evidence from a scientific standpoint and draw your own conclusions. I understand that there's no proof of Bigfoot, and I want everyone else to understand that as well. There is no proof of Bigfoot. Tracks are not proof. Casts are not proof. Pictures are not proof. Footage is not proof. They're nice things, but actual physical proof is a body or a big chunk of meat, something like that. And no one's going to be satisfied until we have that. So what we have is we have evidence that supports the theory of the existence of Sasquatch, but we have some really good evidence that supports that theory. And the bottom line being, give me just a few seconds here. I'll let you speak. The bottom line being is that it's really easy to prove that Bigfoot exists. Someone just has to kill one, or a logging truck has to run one over or whatever. And that's it. It's done. It is impossible to prove that it doesn't exist. It's never going to happen. And there's always going to be someone that has a sighting, and you're never going to prove that it doesn't exist. For all these skeptics and the non-believers and the detractors that are on that side of the battle, it's a losing battle. I mean, man, it's going to be so easy to prove it, but anyone can say they don't believe it, but it's always going to be there.
Very well said. I wanted to touch on, you were talking about comparing handprints and stuff. Up in here in Wisconsin, we actually got footage on thermal of one of these creatures throwing rocks across a river at us. And the next day we went on the other shore and we found 3 different size footprints. And I found this really weird marking in the ground, and I ended up casting it because I believed that it was a handprint. And it's got a thumb way over to one side and then 3 fingers out. And then the third, the pinky's kind of off to the side. And I thought, well, I don't know if this is a footprint or not, or a handprint, but I cast it. And it turned out really nice. Cliff actually has a copy of it as well in his collection. I gave him at one of the conventions. But my point was I got this cast and I brought it home. And I'm like, okay, here's the knuckle print. Here's my handprint. And I lined up the knuckles where they would have been. And the 4 knuckles that are together lined up almost perfect with what mine would have been.
Right.
So I thought that was really cool that, here's, okay, here's a supposed Bigfoot print or a handprint. Here's my supposed Bigfoot handprint. And they lined up, 2 totally different parts of the world.
That thumb way out to the side is probably that non-opposable outward rotated thumb. That you see. And there's a really good, if you read the book, and I can't tell you what page it's on right now, but there's a great picture in there of the 86 handprint my dad got, which is gigantic. And the thumb is straight out to the side. And there's a breakdown of that. If you read Dr. Meldrum's book, Legend Meets Science, he has a nice breakdown of that cast and how it was in wet clay and it moved around a little bit. So it's probably not as big as we appear, it appears in the cast. But it does lack like the muscle structure at the base of the thumb that humans have with our inward rotating thumb, which is something you also see in the 94 handprint of my dad's, is that it lacks that base as well. And it has a lower setting knuckle, like at the base of the thumb, as does the 94 handprint. So we have just a lot of congruent similarities. And like you said, with that handprint, and then Tom Shea's handprint and the Fort Bragg handprint, and even the one from, the Ivan Marks, even the Bossberg handprint, there's similarities there with the Fort Bragg and my dad's 86 one. And so I don't know, man, people can deny all they want, but when you really start looking at the evidence and you take it all into account, I don't see how it's not more widely accepted. That at least it's a possibility, and I think this day and age, maybe it is a little bit more because of an entertainment industry at some point, right now, and you see it on TV, and there's conferences and all this stuff, and it's making, I'm here doing an interview, but so it's a little more accepted, but I think it's a little more accepted as kind of like culture in society and like entertainment, but it may not still be seriously accepted as like a possible undiscovered animal, that is living out there. But these things are real. They are. And one of these days it's going to be proven. And, people like my dad are going to be vindicated. So
I truly hope that's true.
It's going to happen. I don't know if it's going to be my lifetime. Maybe it'll be my, his grandchildren, my boys. But one of these days, it's gonna be proven. So,
like you said, with being more mainstream, more people are willing to come forward, more willing to talk about it, share their stories, their evidence, their pictures, and it's becoming more acceptable instead of this taboo subject. So I think we'll get a lot more out there, and that'll lead to discovery. And
it is, yeah, it's a lot more acceptable, and you're not just like the crazy person anymore, kind of, like you were back in the 80s and stuff like that. My dad was kind of the town like kook for a while, that's kind of the way he was looked at a little bit. So it's a little more acceptable now, which is good, right? But bad at the same time, because we have all this technology now, and we have more people that are interested in it now that aren't trained hunters and trackers, more just like novice people with their drones and their thermals and their cell phones and all this great like scientific equipment that are going out, and we haven't had any better evidence come up than what we had in the 60s through the 80s. Mm-hmm. And part of the reason for that is that some of the people, not all of them, so I'm not trying to offend anyone, but a good majority of the people that are going out now are relying too much on technology and not enough on the training that they need to be able to actually, track these animals in an effective and efficient way, like the old timers were doing, like my dad and Roger Patterson and Renee DeHinden and Bob Timmons and those guys. If they were still around and they have the technology that we have now, this mystery might be solved.
Mm-hmm. So, absolutely. Very good. All right, man.
Don't be lazy.
Absolutely. You have anything else that you want to add, let us know again where we can get the book. I'll put it back up here, and where they can get a hold of you and contact you.
You can get the book at hangar1publishing.com, Amazon, Barnes & Noble online as well. Those are the three main sellers. I have them personally from time to time. I don't keep a whole stockpile of them, with me, but sometimes I do. And on occasion, they are in stock at the North American Bigfoot Center, and you can get them from Cliff Barrickman there. Those copies are autographed. So, that's a nice copy to have if you're looking for something like that. And you can get a hold of me on Facebook or Instagram, mfreeman77 on Instagram, or freemanbigfootfiles@gmail.com, all one word, just like the title of the book. And that's a nice email address for just fielding Bigfoot questions. And I try to talk to everybody. I honestly do, as long as you are respectful and you're actually interested, I will talk to you. I can't tell you how many people have messaged me, not just since the book, but in the last 10 years, just to tell me that they think my dad hoaxed or was fake or lied. And that's all they want to tell me. Don't reach out to tell me that stuff, because I don't have time for that. but if you have serious questions or, whatever you want to talk or just say hi, like I'm more than happy to talk to everybody. So
absolutely. Sounds good.
Yeah. And, I would just final word, I guess, whatever, like kind of what I touched on earlier, I would just challenge everyone to, no matter what you're doing in life, educate yourself. Take the time to educate yourself in what you're interested in, and take the time to look at all aspects and all sides, and look at the evidence from a scientific viewpoint, and not just rely on other people's opinions.
I second that. All right, Michael, thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you for taking your time outside of our normal scheduled time here. Like I said at the beginning, we are recording this because you have a life outside of this and couldn't make it live. But
unfortunately, yeah. Or fortunately, I guess, there is, it's true. I believe it. There's a curse that comes along with Bigfoot. And I saw it with my dad. And being obsessed for, like 15 years. And if you get the book and listen to the audio in there and some of the stuff that happened with him and my mom and stuff like that, you'll get a better kind of insight to that, and look at Renee Hinden and how he kind of abandoned his entire life, in pursuit of this. It was the only thing that matters, and when I kind of got started writing this book, Cliff Barackman actually reminded me of this and kind of gave me a warning and said, make sure that you take time away from this and for your family, and you don't get too caught up in the research and the search for Bigfoot, which is, again, part of the reason I'm not super boots on the ground and stuff like that, is I just don't have time or resources. And I'm unwilling, unlike my dad was, I'm unwilling to sacrifice the other things in my life, for this. And he was willing to sacrifice those. And, that made him a good researcher. It did. And I'm okay not being a good researcher. I'm not going to sacrifice, those things. But beware of the curse as well. So take time for yourselves, and, don't let it completely take over your life. So.
Very good advice. Very good. I need to take that myself.
Oh, sorry, man. I'm one of these. I always joke that I need like 3 hours. On these shows, and you mentioned you mentioned you'd heard me on Cliff and Bobo or whatever. Mm-hmm. We went like 2 hours and 35 minutes or something like that, and they had to like edit the crap like out of that thing to get it down to like an hour and 20 minutes or whatever it was, like when they aired it. Yeah, because I listened back to it and I was like, hey, wait a minute. You cut out a whole 20, like there was like a 20-minute argument between me and Cliff. Like in the middle of the podcast, we were arguing about the footage and the path that I think the subject takes and the path that he thinks the subject takes, because we don't necessarily agree on it, even though it ends up in the same area in the long run. So in the long run, it doesn't matter. And no one's ever going to know anyway, because, well, we're never going to know, But yeah, there was like a whole 20-minute argument, which had to have been entertaining, of us like explaining to the other one why we think this way and what evidence brings us to think, and they totally cut it out. Yeah. So, and I was like, man, that was probably really good, like listening. That's probably good radio.
All right, man. Well, I so much appreciate your time and taking the time to talk with me today. And I love your book. I highly recommend anybody to go check it out. It is very cool, very all color photos with the audio and the video links in there. It's really well done. So definitely. I
appreciate it. Thank you so much. And if you do read it, do me a favor, because I mean, it wasn't done for the money, of course. I wrote this because it needed to be done, but I do have kids and a family and all that stuff. And this does preoccupy some of my time. So if you do pick the book up or whatnot and you read it and you like it or you don't like it, I don't care. Go leave me a review. Go to Amazon or go to Barnes & Noble or whatever and drop a review on the book. So, other people can see what you think about it. And, we'll go from there. And I do appreciate 100% every person that has bought a copy or that's going to buy a copy. So I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yep. Thank you, sir. All right, guys, that's our show. I will be back next week. And until next time, guys, we'll see you out there.
The truth is here and now on WLTK-DB Talk Radio at WLTK-DB.com.